Hi and welcome to another 60-minute Yin Yoga with me, Camilla Bonicel, recording to you all from sunny Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Today's class is going to focus quite a lot on the upper body and the shoulders, which is always an interesting area because we're holding a lot of tension there. So I will repeat this during the class, but please remember to modify and go gentle. As always, we're looking for sensations, not sensational. Avoiding pain, but seeking discomfort. It's this delicate balance between the two. Most of the poses that we're going to do today are not requiring any prop, but the last one, a block or similar. If you don't have a block, I often use like a rolled up shower towel or a firm blanket that often does the same kind of trick. Let's get into it. So the first pose is going to target both shoulder and also groin. So it is a two-part thing. If you are pregnant and you can't be on your belly, I would recommend to do a wide-kneed child's pose. And do the same what we are going to do with the upper body or with the arm. So basically, no baby in the belly means coming down on the belly. And once down on the belly, arm underneath your chest, not your throat, so you don't want to feel like you're choking yourself. So arrange what might need arranging. And then draw the opposite leg up into a 90-degree kind of angle out from your hip. Lowering down. And decide how you want to place your head. Sometimes it's nice to rest the head on the opposite forearm. Some of you might want to use the block or the blanket. Or some of you perhaps place the forehead down onto the ground. So come in to your pose, settle into it. And I said this pose is two parts or two-folded. The arm that you're laying on, where you are compressing the bicep towards your chest, aiming to have as much as of your belly or your chest facing down towards the floor. There's a bit of a pull on the shoulder, like the deltoid muscle. And depending on how you're holding sensation and tension, maybe you're also feeling a pull towards the space between your shoulder blades. I feel it quite a bit towards my left shoulder blade as I'm laying on my left arm. And the other target area is the groin on the bent leg. A gentle pull from inside the groin along the inner thigh down towards the knee. Allow the feeling of the breath hitting the floor to be this rhythm for your practice. Allowing your inhales to match your exhales in length and in strength. And it's quite common after a few minutes in the pose that the fingers on the arm that you're laying on begins to tingle a bit. If it's really a lot and super uncomfortable, you can roll towards that arm a bit and kind of ease the pressure on the arm. But if it feels fine, we have about 30 more seconds to be in the pose. And taking one final round of breath. Then begin to ease your way out of the pose. Straighten the bent leg. Bring the upper body up to remove your arm. Maybe you rest on your belly for a few rounds of breath. When you feel ready to make your way into tabletop, that's where the next pose is going to begin from. So I laid on my left arm, and then that means in the next pose that the right arm is going to be the target arm. This pose, where the right arm extends forward, I bend my left arm to support my forehead. Quarter dog. So begin to settle into your pose. I will tell a few things in the pose. First of all, if it feels way too much already for your lower back, allow your buttocks to move closer towards your heels. They can even be on the heels, like in a different variation of a child's pose, more or less. But otherwise keeping the hips, the buttocks up in the air. The target area for this pose is on the right arm, in the armpit area. The armpit is like the main target area, I would say. And you quite often also feel a pull towards your the chest muscle. And depending on how it feels for you in the pose, if you have a bit of a pinching sensation on top of your shoulder, then often allow the arm to move further out to the side to change the angle on how the shoulder is. Another area of focus in this pose is again that space between the shoulder blades. You are a bit more than halfway through the hold. So stay in the pose. If it feels still way too much in the arm and in the shoulder, you can soften the arm a bit, maybe even bringing the forearm fully into the floor. But otherwise it's basically more only the hand which is in the floor. The arm is straight, so that you're finding that sensation towards the armpit, radiating down a bit towards the chest muscle, the pectoralis, and the space between the shoulder blades. So there's very few poses, if any poses, that have only one target area. Sometimes a pose has a main target area, and then it also affects a few other parts of the body, since everything is connected. Sometimes certain areas are the ones that we really want to focus the pose towards, to stress a specific area of the body. Complete your last round of breath in the pose. And then once that round of breath is completed, however it feels smooth for you to come out of your hold, make your way slowly back to tabletop position. So the next pose is going to be for the wrists and the forearms, or the underside of the forearms, if that's the term. So basically in tabletop, you turn your hands so that the fingers are pointing towards your knees. I'm going to just angle myself from the side so that you can see a bit better. So my thumbs are out to the sides. My palms are into the floor. And my fingers are very close to the knees. The further you have your hands away from your knees, the more sensation. And also, the more of your body weight that you lean forward, the less sensation you create. And the further back you pull your body weight, the more sensation you create in the hold. This is a pose where it's fairly easy to go a bit too far. So let's just say it should not feel like shit is breaking. That way you're kind of pushing it a bit too much. You should still be able to breathe, for instance. You should still be able to relax. But a good stretch. And then on the wrist side, most likely, most of us have a bit of a compression where the bone of the forearm is kind of hitting towards the bone of the hand. Last minute in the hold. As always with all the things that we do, we're looking for this balance between ease and effort. As we practice Yin Yoga, we, as much as possible, want to be able to relax the muscles in the target area or target areas. We want to find that ease in the muscles. But sometimes we need to have certain effort, certain activation to stay in the proper pose, to keep the sensations centered towards that area. For instance, in this pose, my lower body is fairly active, kind of holding me in the position so that my hands and forearms, arms and shoulders can relax. If it feels okay for you to sit back on your heels, allow your hands to just kind of come up into your into your thighs. Otherwise, just sit. Coming out of that pose often feels quite interesting. Can begin to move your fingers a bit. Maybe you're beginning to make fists. Maybe even small circles or similar for the wrists. As often when we have had longer holds in certain joints, they feel a bit fragile. And we'll begin the sequence on the other side. So make your way down on your belly, or as said, if you have a baby in your belly, do a wide knee child's pose and draw the arm underneath. But otherwise, being down on the belly, arm underneath, and the leg up into a 90-degree angle. Come into your pose. And stay in your pose even though I'm making my way out of the pose. So just notice as you are settling into the pose on the second side, how the sensation begins to feel. Allow yourself to rearrange a few things, ladies, if needed. When laying on the arm, sometimes a bit of flesh can come in between, which feels uncomfortable. Shoulder, arm. Maybe you already begin to feel the pull towards your shoulder blade. Or maybe on this side your groin is feeling a bit more. Maybe you notice how the belly presses towards the floor and how it's pressing a bit more on the floor as you inhale, as you fill your belly with air. You are halfway through the hold. Finding this balance between the ease and effort. For me, balance is one of those favorite themes that I'm coming back to so often. Balance, when thinking about it, is so easy to just think about the physical postures in yoga where we need to have balance. The poses where we're standing on one leg and keeping our balance. But balance is so much more than just the physical aspect of creating a balanced posture. Balance is also a deeper meaning. Something I've been struggling with quite a bit lately has been finding that balance between doing and being. One of my favorite expressions in terms of balance is that balance is not something we find. Balance is something we create. Balance is not something you find. Balance is something you create. Take 3 more rounds of breath in your pose. And once your 3 rounds of breath are completed, begin to straighten your bent leg, move the arm out from underneath you, and slowly begin to transition yourself into tabletop position. From tabletop position, the arm that you just laid on will be supporting your forehead, and the other arm is the one extending forward. That's the target area kind of a thing. So allow yourself to sink into this quarter dog pose. The pose targeting to stretch the armpit, to stretch towards the chest muscle, to stretch on top of your shoulder joint, and even stretch towards the space between the shoulder blades. Stay in your pose, but allow yourself to modify if it already begins to feel a bit too much for your back, especially the lower back. Then if that is the case, allow your buttocks to move a bit closer towards your heels. Maybe all the way down into child's pose, or maybe somewhere in between. You create the balance between ease and effort. And might feel completely different on one side than the other. We are on one hand very balanced in our bodies. We're not walking around in circles, for instance. We're managing to pretty much move forward to our liking, I was going to say, but according to our plan. We are balanced enough to have clothes properly fitting us and so on. But we are also very much imbalanced. We have one leg which is longer than the other. We have one side which is more open, more flexible, more stronger. So we are already quite a lot not in balance. But it is this creating the balance physically by adapting the poses, for instance. What is it that you need on your left side might differ from what you need to do on your right side. Treating the poses, the sides, uniquely rather than categorically. Might not be a good word in English. But that you don't have to do exactly the same thing on both sides because you are already not the same. Last minute in the hold. So always in your practice, remind yourself that you are the one creating your balance. What does your body need in terms of props, in terms of modifying a pose? What does your body need on the left side compared to the right side? Not just jumping to the conclusion thinking, I managed to go this deep on the first side, obviously I will be able to go equally deep on the second side. Last breath. begin to smoothly transition yourself out of your quarter dog pose back into tabletop. And from tabletop, yes, we have a second round of the wrist and forearm stretch. So turning your hands, palms into the ground, fingers close towards your knees. One of my personal favorites on doing this pose is having quite a lot of space between my hands and walking my knees in between my hands. This way I can pretty comfortably sit down on towards my heels. Otherwise you can also put a block underneath your buttocks, but still feel a good stretch in my arms. Indeed, a good stretch. Not crazy, but good. If it feels too much, I can easily bring my knees even further forward. But I want to feel something without it being crazy. Soften into your hold. Creating balance. So how then do we create balance if we're also thinking about the concept, the notion that balance is not just a physical thing, but perhaps also a mental thing? Not sure really how and where you are right now in terms of lockdown and corona situation, but here in the Netherlands, things are beginning to ease up in terms of lockdown. We're beginning to transition back to a new normal. And again, it's about finding one's own balance. I know personally I have so much enjoyed having a lot of more time at home, a slower pace, a less filled or packed agenda, time to read, time to have an extra cup of coffee at home in the morning sometimes, time for walks, time for reflection. So how to create a new balance? Two last rounds of breath. When they are completed, slowly kind of just like lift your hands off the floor. Find a seated position that works for you. And just notice. Maybe you have a slight tingling sensation in your fingers. For me, I have this heat increase around my wrists, towards like the top of my hands. My palms feel almost cold. Slowly invite a bit of movement. Maybe you're making fists. Maybe you're making small circles. And yeah, it's not feeling super enjoyable, those little extra movements. Feels a bit fragile, as so often in the Yin Yoga. Coming out of the poses and restoring movement and circulation. So the next part of the practice is going to be down on the back. And you will be wanting to use the block for the last pose. But so basically we're going to lay down on the back and we're going to work with one hand at a time. Beginning with the left arm, moving the hand as high up towards that space between your shoulder blades as you manage. Some of you are not easily placing your hand here. Do your best to kind of like to draw the arm so you will be laying on your arm. That way we're stretching the front side of the shoulder. The legs can be either in butterfly legs or cross-legged, but I will get to that. So for me, lowering down on the opposite elbow, hand towards that space between the shoulder blades, and lowering down. Maybe some of you prefer to have the block underneath the head to create a bit more space. And I said you can do cross-legged. If you do cross-legged, when we switch to the other side, that's when we'll place the legs in the other direction. Or you can do butterfly legs, feet together, knees out wide. This pose is creating, as said, a gentle pull on the front part of the shoulder, again of that like chest muscle. I want you to stay in the pose. You're about halfway through the hold. Balance. Not something we find, but something we create. Then how do we create balance? Yet another awesome quote that I often come back to when talking about balance is that balance is not better time management, but better boundary management. And creating our boundaries to protect, for lack of a better word, our time. To create boundaries between maybe work and family, private time. Maybe creating boundaries between doing things in the evening after work and finding time for rest. Which boundaries do you feel that maybe you can improve? Which ones is it that you want to work on to maybe create a better balance for yourself? With your next inhale, kind of lean towards the side to draw the arm out from underneath you and bring your knees in towards your chest. Hands can rest on your knees, your shins. Take 5 rounds of breath with the knees in towards the chest. Maybe you notice how the belly presses towards your thighs. And then perhaps hands back on towards the knees and simply guiding your knees into circles. Massage the lower back towards the mat. If this feels really not comfortable in your body, then honor your body and don't do it. And then change direction if you did the circles. And then come to stillness again. Maybe if it feels okay to lift your head up towards your knees and really round in. Take another breath here. And then release. Feet back onto the floor. And time for the pose on the second side. So roll to your left side to place your right hand maybe in that space between the shoulder blades, or kind of laying on the arm so that the hand moves towards the left side of your body. If you did the cross-legged before, then do the cross-legged again, but with a weird leg in front. If you did butterfly, then another butterfly. Maybe your feet, you bring them further away from the groin to make it less sensational in the groin area. You can also have a bit of space between the feet if that feels like a better option for you. Again, I want you to stay in the pose, even though I'm making my way out of the pose. Boundary management. Balance is not better time management, but a better boundary management. Sometimes, I don't know about you, but I know for myself, and the reaction I hear from some of the students when teaching around this, is that we often have this notion like that we're not efficient enough, or if we only had more time in the day, then we would manage to do whatever it is that we had on our to-do list or so on. But time is one of those few resources in life and over cultures and people and families and whatever not, that is equal. We all have 24 hours per day, and it is up to us, more or less, on how we spend it. I'm reading a book right now, which is called Why We Sleep, and I'm beginning to get even more respect for the need of sleep, and beginning to be even more convinced on the fact that, okay, sleep is not the area to cut down on time in or for, but rather time to prioritize to get enough sleep, to allow the body to get 8 hours of sleep as often as possible. So if we then are to sleep about 8 hours a night, that means that we have about 16 hours, a bit less, to handle on our own, to prioritize how to spend our time. It's not about having more time and become so bloody more efficient on how to spend our time. But rather putting boundaries on how we're spending it. Roll again towards your side. Remove the arm out from underneath and bring your knees in towards your chest. Hugging your knees, or rather just holding the knees in towards the chest and taking a few deep, soft rounds of breath. Notice how the belly gently presses towards the thighs as you breathe. Maybe you gently pull the chin in towards the chest to make sure that your neck is long. And just begin to create circles with your knees. Your hands can be on top of the knees to gently guide or escort the knees into those circles. No need or attempt to go fast. But allowing one circle to be more or less equal to one round of breath. Then change direction. Notice how maybe in one direction it feels a lot more normal and easy, and how in the other direction it might feel a bit different. Just a few more circles. And then gently release the feet down onto the floor. And we're heading into the last pose before Shavasana. And for this one you will need your prop. So feet into the floor, knees bent. Lift your butt and place the prop, the block or the blanket, underneath your buttocks. And then begin to extend one leg and then the other. I like to create quite some space between my feet. I'm almost like mat width apart between my feet, allowing the feet to open as if I were opening a book. Again, gently draw the chin towards the chest so that the neck is long. If you straight up have this really uncomfortable feeling in your lower back, then move the block closer towards your heels. Often we place the block a bit more towards the lower back, which is really not so comfortable. See if you can begin to deepen your breath. Maybe you're even holding your hands on your belly. Really breathing into your belly. And feel free to take a different variation with your arms. One of my favorites in this pose is to bring the arms above head. Sometimes I kind of need to wiggle my shoulder blades a bit differently to make it comfortable, but after that, the arms above head is just a really nice way to open the chest, soften in the shoulders. This pose, the target area is the top of your pelvis, the hip flexor area, or the so-called psoas muscle. Gently stretching it out in this back bend. Balance. Creating boundaries. Just like this notion of balance not being something we find, but something we create. It's not like you will wake up one morning and all of a sudden you are extremely clear on your boundaries and you never cross your boundaries. It's a daily action. It's a daily challenge to keep your boundaries. Sometimes there's adjustment that needs to be done because the boundaries might not be working as well as you want them. Just a few more rounds of breath in your hold. Take 5 more deep rounds of breath. And once your 5 rounds of breath are completed, bring your arms down by your sides again and your feet back into the floor. Lift your butt up to remove the prop, butt back down, straighten your legs, and just take a few rounds of breath. Sometimes coming out of this pose is holding a lot of sensations in the lower back. From here, the next pose is Shavasana. So begin to make your way into your Shavasana. As always, laying on your back is a really nice way to do Shavasana. But you can of course also do it seated if you prefer. But as you lay on your back, really allow your legs to extend. Allow space between your legs, between your feet. Allow your feet to relax. Maybe you have a blanket that you place on top of you to make sure you're not getting cold. Maybe you have an eye pillow or similar to place on top of your eyes to make it dark. Arms resting perhaps to the sides. Maybe the palms are turned up towards the ceiling so that you allow your fingers to really soften. The fingertips are really sensitive for information. When we have the palms facing down, the fingertips into the floor, it's like we're still feeding our brain with information coming from the fingertips. Hands have a harder time relaxing. Maybe you pull your chin down towards your chest to make sure your neck is long. And if there's anything you need to change to find 5 or 10% more comfort in your Shavasana, this is the time to do that. Balance. Just like in our physical body, balance means different things on our different sides or on different days when you practice. So is that time span. What was a balanced way of life when we were teenagers is looking different to when we're in our 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s or 80s or 90s. You get my point. The balance shift. And it's important that we know that and that we try not to resist it, but rather realize the creation of balance, the boundary management, that they are not rigid, that they need to change as we change, as our life change, as the circumstances around us change. The only thing constant in life is change. So our notion of balance will change. And also this notion of being constantly in balance doesn't work that way either, unfortunately. Balance is something we create, and then life happens, shit happens, and we are out of balance. And we need to shift a few things around to create a new balance, to regain balance. And then we're in balance again, and life happens, and we're out of balance again. It's this constant imbalance, out of balance, imbalance, out of balance. If we can find a smoother acceptance around the concept of balance, and be simply gentler towards ourselves in it. Balance comes and goes. It's something we create every day through our choices, active and passive choices. You have the choice to stay longer in Shavasana, always, always. If that feels like a good option for you, stay in Shavasana. When you want to come out of it, roll to your side. Keep your eyes closed, bring the knees to your chest and lay on your side for a few rounds of breath. Eventually use your top arm to push into the floor, to push yourself into a seated position. And from seated, maybe you want to continue with a seated meditation or a pranayama practice. As always, honor that if that serves your practice. When you feel ready to complete your practice, place your hands together in front of your heart as a way to say thank you. Reminding yourself, balance is something you create. Namaste.